David walked carefully through the dense forest of the alien world. His mission was to survey the land, collect samples, and map the area for future explorers. The trees were taller than anything he had ever seen on Earth, their roots twisting across the ground like giant snakes. The air was heavy, filled with strange scents of flowers that glowed faintly even in daylight. Everything felt both beautiful and dangerous. David kept his scanner close, always alert for unknown creatures. As he moved deeper into the forest, he suddenly froze. A sound reached his ears, soft at first but filled with pain. It was not the cry of an animal. It was a child's voice. David turned quickly, scanning the area. The cries grew louder, filled with fear and suffering. Without thinking twice, he rushed toward the sound. He pushed through thick leaves and branches until he found a small clearing. There, under a fallen tree branch, lay a child unlike any David had ever seen. The child's skin was pale blue with faint glowing marks, and his eyes were large and bright. His clothes were torn, and his leg was trapped under the heavy wood. The child struggled weakly, tears on his face, calling out words in a language David did not understand. But pain was clear in his voice. David dropped his scanner and hurried to the child. He tried to lift the branch, but it was too heavy. He paused, took a deep breath, and used all his strength. His muscles burned, but slowly the branch shifted just enough for him to pull the boy free. The child winced, clutching his injured leg. "You'll be all right," David said softly, even though he knew the child could not understand. He quickly looked around, trying to figure out what to do. His first thought was to contact his ship, but the child's condition looked serious. He could not waste time. He tore a piece of cloth from his sleeve and wrapped it around the boy's leg to stop the bleeding. Then, without hesitation, David lifted the child in his arms. The boy was light, but David could feel his body trembling with weakness. The child looked at him with wide eyes, as if surprised a stranger would help. David gave him a small smile to keep him calm. He began walking quickly, hoping to find help. The forest seemed endless, every direction filled with thick trees and shadows. David's heart pounded as he moved. He was far from his ship, and carrying the child slowed him down. Still, he pressed forward. He could not leave the boy alone in the wild. The cries of strange animals echoed through the forest, and David felt danger everywhere. He held the child close, determined to protect him no matter what. At one point, he stumbled over roots, almost falling, but he tightened his grip and kept moving. Sweat ran down his face, but he refused to stop. Finally, he reached a wide clearing. Sunlight poured down, lighting the ground with golden warmth. For a moment, David felt relief. But that feeling vanished instantly when he noticed movement ahead. Figures stepped out from the shadows, tall and armed with long weapons that glowed faintly. Their armor shone silver and blue, their faces stern and sharp. They were clearly not human. David froze, still holding the child. The warriors surrounded him quickly, their weapons pointed at his chest. He could see the tension in their eyes. To them, he must look like an intruder carrying away one of their own children. He slowly raised one hand to show he meant no harm, while keeping the child safe in his other arm. Then, from behind the warriors, another figure appeared. A woman taller than the rest, her presence commanding. Her hair shimmered like silver under the sun, and a crown rested lightly on her head. Her eyes glowed with authority, and her expression was both cold and questioning. David realized she was not just any leader. She was royalty. The child stirred weakly in David's arms, then pointed a trembling hand toward him. His voice was faint, but one word came out clearly in their language. The warriors froze, and the woman's eyes widened slightly. "Protector," the child whispered. The forest went silent. The armed guards lowered their weapons just a little, confused. The woman stepped closer, her gaze fixed on David. She studied him carefully, as if trying to decide whether he was an enemy or something else entirely. David did not move. His arms ached, his body tired, but he held the child gently, showing he had no ill intentions. He could not understand the word, but he felt its meaning in the child's tone. It was a word of trust. The woman finally spoke, her voice calm yet firm. The guards hesitated, waiting for her command. David stood still, knowing his fate rested on what she decided next. And so, in that clearing of light and shadows, the human explorer and the alien princess met for the first time. He had carried her wounded child, and now, because of one simple word, his life would never be the same. The clearing grew silent after the child's faint whisper. The word carried weight, more than David could understand. The alien warriors stood frozen, their weapons still raised but uncertain. All eyes turned to the woman with the silver crown, the one who seemed to command them all. Her piercing gaze stayed on David, studying every detail of him. The boy stirred again, clutching David's sleeve weakly. His lips moved, repeating the word with all the strength he could gather. "Protector." The woman raised one hand, and instantly the warriors lowered their weapons. They still looked tense, but none dared to act without her command. She stepped closer to David, her eyes never leaving his face. "You," she said, her voice calm but firm. David could not understand her language, but her tone was clear. She demanded answers. David slowly knelt down, placing the child carefully on the ground in front of her. He raised both his hands in peace, showing he had no weapon. Then he pointed to the fallen tree branch behind him, miming how he had lifted it to save the boy. He touched his chest, then gestured to the child with gentle care. The woman's eyes softened for just a moment, though her expression remained strong. She bent down, checking the child's injury herself. When she touched his leg, the boy flinched but did not cry. Instead, he reached for David's hand, gripping it tightly. That simple act made the warriors exchange looks of surprise. The boy trusted the human more than them. The woman straightened, her voice ringing out clearly to her guards. David could not understand the words, but he saw the reaction. The soldiers bowed slightly, stepping back. She turned to him, pointing to herself. "Myra," she said slowly. David realized she was giving her name. He nodded, placing a hand on his chest. "David," he replied. Her sharp eyes studied him again, and though she said nothing more, the name was now known. Two of the warriors stepped forward, carefully lifting the child onto a stretcher of glowing fabric. As they carried him away, the boy still looked at David, his lips moving one last time. "Protector." David frowned, confused but touched by the trust. He had only done what felt right, yet the words seemed to bind him in ways he did not yet understand. Myra gestured for David to follow. Surrounded by armed guards, he had no choice. They walked together through the forest, the warriors keeping a close eye on him. The path led to a hidden gate made of stone and shining crystal. When they passed through, the world beyond amazed David. A great city stretched before him, built into the cliffs and glowing with energy. Towers rose high, connected by bridges of light. Strange creatures flew in the sky, carrying goods from one part of the city to another. The people stopped and stared as the group passed. Murmurs spread quickly, for it was rare to see a human in their world, and stranger still to see one walking beside their princess. Myra led David into a grand hall made of silver walls that shimmered as if alive. The ceiling was high, painted with images of stars and battles long past. At the far end stood a throne carved from crystal, glowing faintly. Myra sat upon it, her expression calm but unreadable. The guards surrounded David, but none touched him. One elder stepped forward, his robe trailing on the floor. He spoke quickly in their language, pointing at David with disapproval. His voice grew louder, his face showing anger. The other nobles nearby nodded in agreement, whispering about the shame of allowing a human into their hall. Myra raised her hand, and silence fell. She turned to David, her voice firm. Though he could not understand the words, he felt the weight of her decision. She pointed at the child, who now rested nearby, his leg being treated by healers. Then she pointed at David. Finally, she spoke one clear word he did understand. Protector. The hall erupted in murmurs. The elder shook his head fiercely, clearly against the idea. The guards looked uncertain. But Myra's eyes never wavered. She stood, walking down the steps of her throne until she stood directly in front of David. "You are protector," she said again, slowly, so he would understand. David's heart pounded. He had no idea what this role meant, but from the reactions of the others, it was something serious. He tried to explain with gestures that he was only helping, that he had no plan or purpose beyond saving a child. But the words seemed to have power in their culture, a meaning greater than simple gratitude. The boy, weak but awake, looked at David again. His eyes were full of trust, his voice faint but steady. Protector. Myra nodded once more, her face softening for the first time. Protector, she repeated, but this time it was not a command or a duty forced upon him. It was an acceptance, almost a recognition. David felt the weight of the title settle on his shoulders. He had come to this world as an explorer, expecting only to map land and study plants. Yet now he stood in an alien palace, named protector of a royal child and bound to a people he did not understand. And in the eyes of Princess Myra, he saw something more than authority. He saw expectation, as if she believed his arrival was no accident. The human had been chosen, whether he wanted it or not. The hall of crystal glowed faintly as David stood surrounded by alien nobles and guards. The word protector still echoed in his mind. He had not asked for this title, but it had been spoken by the child and then confirmed by Princess Myra. The aliens whispered among themselves, their voices sharp and filled with doubt. Myra sat once more upon her throne. Her posture was straight, her face calm, but her eyes carried authority that silenced the crowd. The elder in the long robe stepped forward again, pointing at David as if accusing him of a crime. His words were filled with anger. Though David did not know the language, the meaning was clear. The elder did not trust him. David stood quietly, his hands open at his sides to show peace. He wished he could explain better, but without words he could only show honesty through his actions. Myra watched him closely, as if measuring his patience. Finally, she raised her hand and spoke firmly. The elder stopped talking, though his face still showed disapproval. Two guards stepped forward, motioning for David to follow. Myra nodded once, and David understood she wanted him tested. He was not surprised. To these people, a human was weak, unworthy of such an important role. If he was to be protector, he would need to prove himself. They led him into a wide courtyard outside the hall. The ground was made of smooth stone, glowing lines marking circles and patterns. Aliens gathered quickly, filling the edges of the courtyard. Their voices rose in excitement. David realized this was not only a test but also a spectacle. Myra appeared on a raised balcony, looking down at the field. The child, still being cared for, was brought to her side. His eyes searched for David, full of trust. That look gave David strength. The first test began. A warrior stepped forward, tall and armored, carrying a long staff that hummed with energy. He spun it easily, showing his skill. The crowd cheered. David had no weapon, but a guard tossed him a simple wooden staff, far less advanced than the one his opponent carried. The warrior attacked first, striking quickly. David barely blocked, the force shaking his arms. He stumbled but kept his grip. The alien moved faster, pressing him back. The crowd shouted, expecting the human to fall quickly. But David remembered his training back on Earth. He was not a soldier, but he had learned self-defense, using speed and timing instead of strength. He watched carefully, waiting for the right moment. When the warrior struck again, David stepped aside and used the alien's momentum to push him off balance. The crowd gasped as the warrior stumbled, nearly falling. Encouraged, David pressed forward, striking with quick jabs rather than heavy blows. The warrior recovered, attacking harder, but David adapted. He moved with patience, using clever angles instead of brute force. At last, with one swift move, he hooked the staff under his opponent's arm and twisted, sending the weapon flying from the warrior's hands. Silence fell, followed by surprised murmurs. The human had won the first trial. Myra's face remained calm, but David thought he saw the smallest hint of approval in her eyes. The second test followed quickly. This time it was not about combat. He was led to a puzzle of glowing stones placed on the ground in a complex pattern. The elder announced something, and the crowd grew eager again. David realized it was a test of mind, not body. He knelt by the stones, studying them. Each stone glowed a different color, and lines of light connected some but not others. He touched one, and the light shifted, changing the whole pattern. He understood at once it was a challenge of logic, to connect all stones in harmony. David worked slowly, thinking carefully. He did not know their rules, but he trusted his instincts. Every time he moved a stone, he pictured it like a map, fitting the pieces together. The crowd grew restless as time passed, some whispering that he would fail. But finally, after many careful moves, the stones glowed brightly all at once, forming a perfect circle of light. The courtyard lit up, and the crowd gasped. Even the elder's eyes widened in surprise. David had solved it. The third and final test was one of courage. A beast was brought into the courtyard, chained but fierce. It had 4 legs, sharp claws, and eyes that burned like fire. The guards held it back, but Myra's voice gave the command, and the beast was released. David's heart pounded. He had no weapon, only his wooden staff. The beast roared and charged. Instead of fear, David felt a strange calm. He had faced danger before, though never like this. He stood firm as the beast leapt. At the last second, David rolled aside, striking the beast's leg with his staff. It stumbled but recovered quickly, turning toward him again. He knew he could not overpower it. Instead, he used his speed, dodging and striking weak points. The crowd shouted in shock and excitement. The beast lunged again, but David noticed its movements were heavy, its leg injured. With one quick motion, he thrust his staff into the ground, creating a barrier. The beast slammed into it, stumbling hard. David leapt forward, placing his staff across its neck, not to kill but to hold it still. The beast thrashed, but then slowed, recognizing his strength and calm. At last, it lowered its head in submission. The guards rushed forward, chaining it once more. The courtyard erupted in cheers. Even those who doubted him could not deny what they had seen. Myra rose from her balcony. Her voice carried across the courtyard. Though David could not understand her words, the tone was clear. She was declaring his victory. The child smiled weakly from her side, whispering once more the word that had begun it all. Protector. David stood tall, breathing hard but steady. He had passed their trials. The court might not fully accept him yet, but he had earned their respect. And in that moment, he knew his journey was only beginning. The city shone with light, but David felt a strange weight in the air. After the trials, he was allowed to stay inside the palace under guard. The people now looked at him with curiosity rather than open scorn, but whispers still followed wherever he walked. Some called him protector with respect, while others said it with doubt, as if the word did not belong to a human. David spent his days learning what little he could. Though he did not understand their language fully, he was quick to notice gestures, tones, and expressions. Princess Myra often tested him, sometimes by sending him with her guards to small missions outside the palace. He was watched closely, but each time he returned, he earned a little more trust. One evening, while walking through the quieter halls of the palace, David noticed something unusual. Two servants were speaking in hushed voices near a window. They stopped immediately when they saw him, their eyes wide with alarm, before hurrying away. David thought nothing of it at first, but a cold feeling remained in his chest. Later that night, he heard faint noises near the child's chamber. Guards stood outside, yet David's instincts told him something was wrong. He moved quickly and slipped into the shadows. Inside the chamber, he saw a figure dressed in black, standing too close to the boy's bed. The child stirred, sensing danger, but before the figure could act, David lunged forward. He grabbed the intruder's arm, forcing the weapon away. The two struggled in silence, the assassin moving with deadly skill. David had no weapon, only his strength and determination. He fought hard, finally managing to pin the attacker down. By then, the noise had drawn the guards inside. They captured the intruder, who hissed words filled with hatred before being dragged away. The child clung to David, trembling. Myra entered soon after, her eyes sharp with anger as she looked at the captured assassin. She knelt by her nephew, whispering softly to calm him. The boy pointed to David again, whispering protector as tears rolled down his cheeks. Myra stood, her face full of storm. She spoke quickly to her guards, giving orders. The assassin was taken away, but David knew this was no ordinary crime. Someone powerful had sent the attacker. The next day, Myra called a private meeting in a tall chamber with walls that glowed faintly with patterns of stars. David was there, along with a few trusted advisors. Myra's voice was calm but heavy as she spoke. David could not understand the full speech, but from her gestures and the anger in her eyes, he understood enough. There was a faction inside the empire that wanted power for themselves. The child, as heir to the throne, was a target. If he were gone, others could claim control. Myra's position as princess was already challenged by rivals, and the arrival of a human protector only added to the tension. David listened carefully, nodding when Myra looked at him. He felt the weight of the word more than ever now. It was not just a title, it was a responsibility. He had saved the boy twice already, but the danger was growing. In the following days, the palace became stricter. Guards doubled their patrols. Myra moved carefully, never without escort. Yet still, danger crept in unseen ways. Once, while walking through the garden, David noticed a guard's hand tremble oddly near his weapon. His instincts screamed, and he pulled Myra back just as a hidden blade shot from the man's sleeve. The traitor was caught, but it proved that even the palace walls could not keep out betrayal. Myra grew more thoughtful, often watching David when she believed he did not notice. She had been cautious with him at first, but now her trust was slowly forming. He had no reason to fight for her people, yet he did. He risked his life not for power or reward, but because he refused to let harm come to the child or to her. One night, Myra spoke directly to him in slow words, choosing ones he could understand. "Protector," she said, pointing at the boy's chamber. Then she placed her hand on her chest and looked at him with steady eyes. "Protector of us all." David felt his chest tighten. He had never imagined himself in such a role. He was only one man, a stranger in this world. Yet somehow, through simple choices and acts of courage, he had become something greater in their eyes. The threats did not stop. Whispers of rebellion spread across the city. Fires lit in hidden corners at night. Myra's advisors argued, some urging her to keep David away, others saying his presence was a sign of fate. Through it all, David remained close, watching carefully, ready to act. One evening, standing on the balcony of the palace, David looked out across the glowing towers of the alien city. It was beautiful, but shadows stirred within it. He knew danger was coming, greater than before. He could feel it like a storm building in the distance. Behind him, Myra stepped out quietly. For a moment, they stood side by side, gazing at the city together. She did not speak much, only a few words in her language. But David could sense their meaning. It was not a command this time. It was trust. And in that moment, David understood. He was no longer just a visitor. He was part of their struggle, bound by the word the child had spoken. He was their protector. Days turned into weeks, and David's presence in the palace became impossible to ignore. At first, many nobles had looked at him with distrust, whispering that a human did not belong in the royal court. But little by little, his actions began to speak louder than their doubts. Each time danger appeared, he stood firm. Each time a problem arose, he tried to help. The word protector was no longer only spoken by the child, it was slowly spreading through the palace. Princess Myra tested him often. Sometimes she sent him with her soldiers to patrol the outer walls of the city. Other times she ordered him to join supply runs outside the palace gates, where the people gathered. Each mission was dangerous, for rebels were growing bolder, but David never refused. He stood beside her guards, moving through the unknown with steady courage. The soldiers did not like him at first. They called him weak behind his back, whispering that he would fail in battle. But those whispers began to change. On one patrol, an ambush struck from the cliffs. Arrows of light rained down, and the soldiers scattered. David, instead of hiding, rushed forward and pulled one wounded guard to safety. He carried the man across rough ground while shielding him with nothing but a wooden shield. When the fight was over, that guard bowed to David, calling him protector with his own lips. Word of this act spread quickly. Soon, more soldiers looked at him with respect. He was not one of them, yet he risked his life as if he had always been part of their ranks. Myra noticed the change too. She watched him closely, her expression thoughtful. Each time he returned from a mission, covered in dust and sweat, she asked questions in her language, slowly trying to make him understand. She wanted to know not only what he had done but also why he had chosen such actions. David answered in broken words and simple gestures, but his meaning was always the same: he protected because it was right. One evening, Myra called David into a quiet chamber where the walls were painted with stars and symbols of her people's history. She stood by the window, the silver crown glinting faintly in the light. When he entered, she turned to him and spoke slowly, choosing simple words. "You protect because you choose," she said. "Not because you must." David nodded. He touched his chest, then pointed toward the boys' chamber down the hall. "Protector," he said softly. Myra's stern face softened. For the first time, she gave a small smile. "Protector," she repeated, but her voice carried warmth. It was a moment of understanding between them, a bond forming not through orders or trials but through trust. The bond deepened when another attack came. The rebels struck a supply convoy outside the city, hoping to weaken the palace. Myra ordered David to join the defense. The battle was fierce. Blades clashed, arrows flew, and chaos filled the air. David fought with determination, using clever tactics rather than raw strength. He led a small group of guards to circle around the enemy, surprising them from behind. The plan worked, and the convoy was saved. When they returned, Myra herself walked into the courtyard to meet him. The people gathered, whispering. Myra raised her hand, silencing them all. In front of her court, she spoke clearly. "Protector." The word no longer sounded like a title forced upon him. It was now a recognition, a sign that she saw him as something important. That night, David sat in the palace garden, tired but thoughtful. The stars above were brighter than any he had seen on earth. He wondered if he would ever return home. Yet when he thought of the child's trust and Myra's steady gaze, he felt his place was here. Myra joined him quietly, standing by the fountain. For a long moment, they did not speak. Then she said softly, "Our people do not trust easily. But they begin to trust you. I begin to trust you." David looked at her, hearing the honesty in her tone. He nodded once, placing a hand over his chest. "Protector," he said again. She gave a rare smile, one filled with respect. "Protector," she answered. From that night forward, something had changed. David was no longer just a stranger bound by a word. He had become part of their struggle, part of their hope. Myra no longer saw him as an outsider but as someone she could rely on. And though the shadows of rebellion still gathered in the empire, the bond between the human and the alien princess grew stronger each day. Together, they were no longer simply ruler and foreigner. They were allies. And perhaps, in time, they would be more than that. The city walls glowed in the night, but behind their brightness danger gathered. The rebels had grown stronger. Their attacks were no longer small ambushes or single assassins. Now whole groups marched openly, burning villages and cutting supply lines. Rumors spread quickly that they planned to strike the capital itself. Inside the palace, the air was heavy with worry. Advisors argued in the Great Hall. Some demanded harsher punishments on suspected traitors, while others warned that fear would only make more rebels rise. Myra listened in silence, her calm gaze fixed on the floor. When the voices grew too loud, she raised her hand. The hall fell quiet at once. Her eyes turned to David. He stood near the steps of the throne, watching carefully. Though he could not understand all the words, he understood enough from their tones. This was no longer only a political matter. It was war. That evening, Myra called him to her private chamber. Maps covered the table, showing mountains, rivers, and paths leading to the capital. She pointed to several spots marked with glowing red stones. David leaned closer, recognizing them as battle sites where the rebels had struck. He studied the map in silence, then looked at her. "War," he said simply. Myra nodded, her expression firm. She moved a hand across the map, showing how the rebels were closing in. Then she placed a single blue stone on the capital itself. Her voice grew softer, almost heavy. If they failed, the city would fall. David thought carefully. He had studied history back on Earth, stories of battles where smaller forces won through strategy rather than numbers. He picked up stones from the map and began moving them, showing ambush points and traps. Myra watched closely, her sharp eyes following his every gesture. Slowly, she began to see his plan. The next day, Myra summoned her commanders. To their surprise, David stood beside her as she spoke. She explained his strategy, using her own words but following his ideas. Some commanders frowned, doubting that a human could know war better than them. Yet Myra's voice was steady, leaving no room for argument. The plan would be followed. When the rebels attacked days later, they expected an easy victory. Instead, they found themselves caught in traps. Hidden soldiers struck from the cliffs. Supply wagons rolled into place, blocking escape paths. David himself led a group of guards, showing them how to move in smaller, quicker units instead of one large mass. The rebels, unprepared for such tactics, began to break apart. In the thick of the battle, David fought with all his strength. He carried only a simple blade, far less advanced than alien weapons, but he used it with determination. When one of Myra's guards fell, David rushed to pull him back, shielding him from enemy fire. He never thought of himself, only of protecting those around him. At one point, a rebel leader charged directly toward Myra's position. The princess stood calm, but danger was close. David ran faster than he thought possible, placing himself between the rebel and the princess. The clash was fierce, but he managed to disarm the attacker and drive him back. Myra's eyes met his for a brief moment. In her gaze was not only gratitude but also trust that ran deeper than words. By the time the sun set, the rebels had been pushed back. The battlefield was filled with smoke and dust, but victory belonged to the capital. The people cheered as Myra walked among them, her presence strong and steady. Beside her stood David, exhausted but unbroken. That night, the palace was filled with celebration. The soldiers praised him openly, calling him protector without hesitation. Even some of the nobles who had doubted him now bowed their heads in respect. The child, safe in the palace, smiled proudly whenever David passed. But David himself felt no pride. He sat quietly in the garden, his body sore, his mind heavy with thoughts. The rebels had been defeated this time, but he knew war was not over. The enemy would return, stronger than before. Myra found him there, standing under the starlight. She approached silently, then spoke softly. "Protector," she said. David turned, meeting her eyes. There was no crown on her head now, no throne between them. She was not only a princess in that moment. She was a woman who carried the weight of her people's future. "You fight not for reward," she said slowly, choosing words he could understand. "You fight because you care." David nodded. He placed a hand over his chest. "Protector," he replied simply. Myra's eyes softened. She looked at him for a long time before speaking again. "With you, my people have hope. Without you, we fall." The words struck him deeply. He had come to this world as an outsider, expecting only to explore and return home. Yet now he stood at the center of a struggle that could decide the fate of an empire. And though he had not chosen this path, he knew in his heart he could not turn away. Far in the distance, smoke still rose from the battlefield. It was a reminder that the fight was not finished. War was on the horizon, and more trials would come. But David also knew something else. He was no longer alone in this fight. Myra stood with him, trusting him fully. The child looked to him with hope. And the people now called him protector, not out of tradition but out of true belief. Whatever storm was coming, he was ready to face it. The days after the great battle were filled with both relief and tension. The city was safe, but whispers of another attack grew stronger with each passing hour. Messengers arrived with troubling news. The rebels had not accepted defeat. Instead, they had gathered in greater numbers than ever before, calling allies from distant lands. Their leader, a shadowy figure spoken of only in fear, had finally decided to march against the capital. Inside the palace, Myra stood tall before her council. Her face showed calmness, but inside she felt the weight of every life that depended on her. The child sat quietly beside her, sensing the seriousness in the air. David stood near the throne, his sharp eyes fixed on the commanders as they gave reports. The capital was preparing for the largest battle in its history. That night, Myra and David walked together through the palace gardens. The stars shone above, bright but distant, as if watching the world below. David stopped near the fountain, his reflection trembling in the water. He turned to Myra and spoke slowly, his words heavy with meaning. "This is not only your war," he said. "It is mine now." Myra looked at him, her eyes glowing softly in the starlight. "You could have left long ago," she said quietly. "Yet you stayed." David gave a small nod. "Because I saw hope here. Because you believe in me. And because they call me protector." Myra's lips curved into the faintest smile. She did not need to say more. In that moment, they both understood. When the enemy came, they came in darkness. Thousands marched toward the city walls, carrying torches that lit up the night like rivers of fire. The ground trembled under their steps. On the walls, the defenders stood ready, their armor gleaming. Myra stood at the center, her banner raised high. David was by her side, sword in hand. The battle began with a roar. The rebels stormed the gates, their weapons crashing against the shields of the defenders. Arrows filled the air like storms of iron. Fire spread across the fields. Yet the capital held strong. The people fought not only for survival but for their princess, who stood among them like a guiding star. David led a group of soldiers through the fiercest fighting. His tactics from earlier battles once again proved powerful. Small units moved swiftly, striking where the enemy was weakest. At one point, the rebels tried to break through the main gate, but David rallied the defenders, holding the line until reinforcements arrived. His voice, though human and different, carried strength that inspired everyone around him. Myra herself joined the fight, her blade shining in the firelight. Though her advisors begged her to stay back, she refused. Her people needed to see her courage, to believe that their leader was not afraid. Side by side with David, she fought, every strike carrying the weight of her duty. The battle raged for hours, the night seeming endless. The rebels pressed harder, their leader finally stepping forward. A towering figure in dark armor, his voice thundered across the field as he challenged Myra's right to rule. The sight of him made even the bravest soldiers hesitate. But David did not. He stepped forward, standing between the enemy leader and Myra. His sword was plain, his armor scratched and dented, yet his presence was unshaken. The two clashed in a storm of steel and fire. Each strike echoed through the field, watched by friend and foe alike. The enemy leader was stronger, faster, armed with power that seemed impossible to defeat. Yet David did not fall. Every time he was struck down, he rose again. Every time his blade was pushed back, he found the strength to push forward. His will burned brighter than any weapon. He was fighting not only for himself but for Myra, for the child, and for all the people who had come to believe in him. At last, with one final strike, David drove his blade into the ground, forcing the enemy leader to stumble. Using every ounce of strength left in him, he disarmed the foe and stood tall, bloodied but unbroken. The rebels saw their leader fall and their courage wavered. One by one, they fled into the darkness, leaving the field behind. The capital was saved. Silence fell across the battlefield. Then, slowly, the defenders began to cheer. They raised their voices, crying out the name of their princess and the title of the man who had stood beside her. "Protector," they shouted again and again, until the sound filled the night. Myra walked to David, her steps steady but her eyes filled with emotion. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "Without you, we would have fallen. With you, we stand." David bowed his head, too tired to speak. The child ran forward, wrapping small arms around him, and for the first time since coming to this world, he felt not like a stranger but like one of them. The city celebrated for days. Songs were sung, banners raised, and the people honored both Myra and David as heroes. Yet in the quiet of the night, when the noise had faded, David stood once more in the garden. Myra joined him, the stars shining above. "You are no longer just a visitor here," she said softly. "You are part of us now. Protector, friend, and more." David looked at her, feeling the truth in her words. He had come from another world, lost and alone. But now he had found a home, a purpose, and a bond stronger than any distance. The horizon glowed faintly with the first light of dawn. A new day was beginning, not of fear but of hope. Together, Myra and David stood ready to face whatever future awaited. And in the hearts of the people, one name would never be forgotten: the Protector.